Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be joined by Erin Thorp. She is a leadership development expert, and she's an author on a mission to really redefine how we lead through empathy, these actual conversations, and courageous boundaries. She's also the host of the Tactical Empathy podcast, and I'm really excited to dive into this conversation with you today. We met via LinkedIn. I started
Yep.
following your podcast and I was just like, you know what? I'm going to reach out and see if she wants to have a conversation. So, Erin, did I miss anything in the introduction? Can you share a little bit about you?
Yeah, no, thank you. Good morning. It's nice to be here. You didn't miss much. I mean, I guess I started, the thing that I think people find most surprising is I started my career as an engineer in construction. And so, now they're like empathy and leadership coach. How did that happen? So I think, it's a part of my story for sure. And definitely something I'm sure we'll get into, but it's an aspect of me. It's part of who I am and has shaped kind of how this has all come to be and happened.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I think it's really, especially in the industry that you came from, empathy wasn't something shared. I mean, conversations really weren't shared. And so, before we even dive in further, I think it's really important for people to really understand what empathy is and what it is not. So, you want to dive into a little bit of that for us?
Yeah, for sure. It's a question I ask everyone that comes on the podcast as well. So I've had some really great, personal takes and different ways of explaining it. I think for me, at the end of the day, empathy comes down to a few key things. I think it's understanding, which sounds really simple and is incredibly hard to do. Um, it's presence, right?
Mm.
And it's it's listening without judgment. And all like the bottom line is it's understanding. In order to do that, it requires presence, it requires listening without judgment. There's a bunch of other things that kind of go into that, which I think makes understanding a bit more complex than just one word.
Yeah, absolutely. Well,
Mhm.
and I think the other layer to it is that we can't have understanding for others if we don't understand ourselves. And
100%. Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
and when you're starting to have these conversations, I'm sure there is a ton of resistance to,
Mm.
getting started. And how do you help really soften that initial instinctive like guard that goes up whenever we're talking about empathy? And I say this because so often people are like, but I don't want to have a full therapy session with people. Like, then I'm
Mhm.
going to have to hear their life story. And I think we're just really confusing what being a leader and showing empathy actually is and how you help break that barrier of entry.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit about what it is, which is understanding and presence and listening without judgment. But what it's not is fixing. I think that's the biggest kind of empathy hijack or misstep or mistake that I see is somebody brings us something and we think it's ours to solve.
Hmm.
And as soon as and I don't know about you, and for anybody who's listening, I mean, this definitely, just think about your own personal relationships, whether that's a partner, a parent, a child, a sister, brother, best friend. When you take them something or, you've got something to share, generally, we're not looking for a solution. We're looking for an ear. We're looking to be heard. We're looking to be validated and we're looking to be understood. And so the same thing is true in leadership. And what's hard is, and especially the industry that I work in and that I came from, so my work tends to be with mostly, I would say, more technically trained professionals, is we are trained and go to school for a really long time to learn how to apply logic and reason to solve problems. The problem is that doesn't work. So we practice that skill set at length every day. And the better you are at it, the more you get promoted, the more highly paid you are, the more valuable you are to your organization, right? The problem is that skill set doesn't work great on people, especially when we're talking about, you know, feelings and emotions, and everybody has them and everybody's got something going on in their lives, whether it's this big or this big. We've got things going on in our lives, and what we don't need is logic and reason. What we need is somebody to show up and just see us and validate us and hear us first. And then we can get into logic and reason. But the thing that most leaders want to do first is they want to bypass the feelings, the seeing, the understanding, and they kind of go, oh, that's the soft, fluffy stuff. I don't want to do that. I'd rather just solve the problem. Let's just keep it professional. Let's focus on work. And I think what most leaders miss is that 95% or more of the actions people take every day are driven by how they feel.
Mm. Mm. Wow.
So
yeah, that kind of puts it in perspective, right?
Right? You don't take time to talk about the feelings. You miss a huge part of the understanding of why they're doing what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's powerful. Even just hearing that, I'm sure people are like their jaws just dropping because you don't think about how emotionally driven we are. And,
Yeah.
and especially with the world changing, like our environments are changing every single day and emotions are high. People are intimidated, they're scared, they're
Yep.
freaking out for better lack of better words.
Yeah.
And you have to understand and see that instead of only, like you said, seeking the easy route solution. You've worked with so many leaders. Like, what do you think that common thread that you're seeing, and not only the resistance side of things, but those that are choosing to lead differently and really guide their teams forward, having a little bit better understanding?
I'd say the common thread is they're not scared to be messy,
Hmm.
because it's not linear, it's not predictable. You have no idea where this conversation might go, what somebody might say, what they might bring you, how you might react, how they might react. It's not predictable, right? I mean, we can anticipate and we can work on those things. But I think the thing that I see in leaders who are willing to do this work is they're not afraid to be messy. They're not afraid to make a mistake. They're not afraid to circle around and say, hey, that conversation we had yesterday didn't go so well. Can we try again? Can we have a do-over, right? I got triggered. Maybe I missed something in you. I think that's the biggest thing, because it's like any new skill, right? This has not been modeled in leadership in previous generations. We don't know what it looks like. We haven't seen it. None of us have great examples, consistent great examples of what this looks like and how it should be done. We're all kind of figuring it out as we go.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is I think our younger generations, who tend to get a bit of a bad rap about being lazy and not wanting to work, I think they're actually just maybe demanding more of us as leaders in terms of being a bit more tuned in with how people feel, quality of life, well-being, all of these things. And our leadership generation right now really doesn't have that modeled for them.
Right.
So we're figuring it out, and we're in the messy middle right now. We're trying to test what that looks like, and to each kind of figure out how would we approach that, and what does that skill set look like for us. So I think it's a willingness to try. That's the common thing that I see in leaders who want to lead differently, is just a willing to try something new.
Right. Well, and when I go back to what you were saying about this younger generation, so I have learned so much from those that are younger than me while I was in these different leadership roles, because they are, you said it right, they are demanding different leadership and different support. And they're much better at holding boundaries. And that can be intimidating for a person who has lived in the I will stay up until midnight to get things done era, right? And then
Totally.
so I learned so much about, how, and it's a reflection moment. I think as leaders, if we can have that reflection moment of what are they teaching me, and there's a balance, like we do like kind of need a little bit of structure in the middle, but again, these are learning opportunities. And with the rise in AI and all of the changes there, coming into a different state of understanding is imperative. Like we have to do better. And it not only that, it's that we have the capacity. So we're getting all this time back. And so why not develop these skills? And I love that you said it's a skill. It's something that you practice.
It's a skill.
right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the thing is like somebody has this like wayward conversation, like you're saying, like it's like, oh, this got uncomfortable. And that's it. They're like, well, nope, I didn't do it right. Check it off the box. I'm moving on.
Yeah.
So to kind of tune into that a little bit, how are you guiding leaders that this is foreign information to them? I mean, if you even want to dive into connecting your personal experience with it, go for it. I think it would be really great for those that are on the technical side who have that same lived experience to hear it.
Yeah. So I think here's the thing, like most of us, especially in a professional setting, and if you are, somewhere maybe like 10 years plus into your career, you're not you're doing a lot of problem solving on your own. That's probably what your job entails a lot of. Whatever that looks like, whatever problems you're solving. And we tend to bring that same skill set to our lives, right? We manage our schedules, we manage our demands. Um, and for me, my kind of unlocking moment happened about, I want to say it was probably, I'm losing track now, but it was over 10 years ago, probably closer to 15 years ago now. We had received some not very good news about my daughter and her academics, and there was a big kind of shakeup in her life. And I sat with that for a couple of weeks. It happened over the Christmas holidays, and I spent the Christmas holidays kind of, problem solving. Okay, what are we going to do? How are we going to tackle this? What do I need to do? What does my husband need to do? What do the other kids need to do? And so by the end of the 2-week Christmas holidays, I had arrived at my decision. I knew what I was going to do. And I went into my leader's office and I sort of said, okay, here's the deal. I need to quit my job because I need to take care of this situation at home. And it's just going to take too much bandwidth. I don't have the time to give to work. And I really need to focus on my family right now. And I didn't expect anything else other than maybe, we're going to miss you and we're sorry that this is happening.
Mm-hmm.
And what ended up happening was he goes, I went through something similar in my family a few years ago. And I just like to kind of explore, like if you don't mind sharing what's going on. And so I went in a little bit deeper and he said, are you open to maybe some different suggestions on how you might handle this? And I said, well, not really. Like, this is kind of what I think I need to do. And I said, but I'm willing to listen, because at that point, so here's the thing. He had taken time to understand my situation, and I was no longer in an emotional state, right? I had felt seen, I'd felt heard, I felt understood. My emotions had kind of come up and out and had run their course, so to speak. Not that I wasn't feeling things about the situation, but I wasn't running the show in that moment. And so as he presented other solutions and he sort of said, so here's the deal, like it's the middle of January. We all just came back from holidays. If you hold on till the end of March, you could get your bonus that you've worked really hard for over this last year. And I said, oh, never even thought about that. That might be something I should consider. Right. Which I thought, he didn't have to do that.
Right.
Right. And then he said, I'd also like to explore you taking a leave of absence instead of quitting, because I'd love for you to have a job to come back to when this gets sorted out, because it will get sorted out. Like, it's not going to be forever. And I was like, I had made up my mind that I had problem solved, right? I had sat with it, all the things. And I don't think I would have heard those suggestions the same way if he hadn't taken time to understand what I was going through and to really let me have my kind of emotional moment, if you will, which I think is what leaders are really scared of, especially if you don't have a lot of skill in managing uncomfortable topics and situations. And so for me, that was I look back on that moment and was like, holy cow, what kind of magic did you just spin? Because I was like, that was amazing. I went in with a decision that I was quitting my job in 2 weeks. And here I am going to work another 2 months, but I'm also not going to lose my job. So for me, that was kind of the moment. And when I was off with my daughter on that leave of absence is really when I started to look back at that moment and go, okay, what really happened there? And how did that all unfold? And what did happen? And that's where it really came back to me that this was just that was leading with empathy. There was still boundaries. There were still deadlines. There was still work that had to get done. it wasn't soft, it wasn't fluffy, it wasn't, him saying, okay, just don't worry about anything. Like I still worked for 2 months.
Mhm.
Um, but there was a moment in there. And again, I think this is, circling back to kind of like what's the misconception about empathy is that it's going to derail the work. I think that's the biggest misconception is that if I open the door on somebody's feelings or tough experience or, unknown area, then it's just going to take over and bleed over into everything and it's going to distract us.
Mhm.
And I think the exact opposite is true. I think when we don't talk about it, when we try to hide it, when we try to put on the brave face and toughen up and push through, that's when it actually distracts us.
Absolutely.
Because we got this thing going on and we're trying to say no to the feelings and the emotional and the real human experience and trying to put on our logic and reasoning and just get it done kind of attitude. And it's like you can't, your focus is split
Right. I think I
and you
can't
don't do anything very well.
Yeah, I can't remember the study, but there was a study that I read, I think it was last year actually, about this very thing, about like by not just processing what we're going through, we actually not only in my work carry the energy of that experience, but it's the distraction that really
Yeah.
takes us so much more energy and effort to power through the day. It's kind of like you have that bad, like negative interaction, and you're like ruminating over as you're
Ruminating. Yeah.
else, and you're doing, instead of just taking a moment to really process what actually happened, then you can kind of filter through the experience. But we're so geared towards everything has to move. And I want
Hmm.
to circle back to what you said about, it still had boundaries, there were still deadlines. It wasn't like he was
Yep.
like, oh, here, do whatever you need to. There were still expectations. And I
Totally.
think that when we can see that lens, it's not, yes, if I open this, it's going to mean you're going to become my best friend. And then we have to go have coffee. Not that you can't, but I'm just saying, like, it can just shift the communication, and it builds loyalty and trust and dependency.
100%.
When people come in, do their work, and can feel good going home. Like, I'm sure that you showed up 110% even better despite what you were going through because you felt seen, heard, validated, and supported.
100%. Yeah. And to your point, I came back to the job and it did get worked out, all of those things. And I've seen it since then, when I actually take time to tackle like, hey, what's really going on in your life? What are you really dealing with? Not that we can let the deadline on the report slip or the client deliverable slip or anything like that, but it's just like, yes, we have this deadline and this, expectation, but what are you also dealing with that's might be helping or hindering you getting to that, and are there things that we can do? And a lot of the time what I found over the years, like, so since then, this has sort of been my life has been my lab of really looking at this stuff. Since I have started really kind of diving into leading with empathy first, and then, again, we're not relaxing the expectations. We're not removing the goals or the targets or the whatevers. What's interesting is people actually, once you have these conversations, most of the time tend to actually do better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They'll get it done faster, sooner, quicker, because of what you just talked about in terms of building loyalty and trust and being validated and seen. And it's like, they don't want it, they're not looking for an excuse to get excused from the job. In most cases, what they're looking for is somebody to go, yeah, you got a lot on your plate right now. And if I can make that a little bit lighter, I will. And if not, at least we're all on the same page, understanding what it is we're carrying.
Right. And it gives that power of choice then from the leader. Is there a different, you know, because there's a difference in like a misalignment in, an employee. There's a difference. Like if they're not aligned with the work and on all of that. And like you said, there's a situational, like if there's something going on in the back end that they're just having to hold for themselves. And sometimes it's literally just the conversation that makes somebody come out of that sense of tension and into ease. And not only are we helping support them, but what my mind is going to is that we're helping their physical body. Because when
Yeah.
you're holding on to something and you're just holding on to it, Dr. Fisher, Jonathan Fisher, had mentioned in a post the other day about how the heart can constrict up to 70%
Oh
in
my
a
goodness.
stress. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's like barely moving. So those are some of the things to think about, like when we're holding on to these, even as a leader, when we're holding on to a really hard conversation, it's doing so much internal damage that it's better to at least process it with a peer or a colleague, a mentor, so that then you can have that grounded conversation. And okay, so what took it from learning about this moment to putting it into a book? Because a book is a big process. So how did that come about?
Yeah. Well, the book really started as a bit of a self-reflection journal exercise that I was doing while I was off managing this situation with my daughter, because I did find I had an abundance of time. And for somebody who was used to being fairly overscheduled, um, and a mentor at the time, was reviewing, or, I would share passages and stuff like that. And she's like, really, Erin, like you've got a book here. Like, you should just really finish it and follow it through. And so, being an engineer, I had no idea what entailed writing a book. So hired a writing coach, and eventually, did end up with this finished product. And the writing started because I really wanted to speak about it. And so I was like, okay, do I start speaking first or do I write first? And it was kind of like, it doesn't really matter. You're going to get where you want to get to either way. So, so published the book shortly after returning from my leave of absence. And then the work has just sort of grown. I spent another 4 or 5 years in corporate, kind of walking two lines of doing some coaching and leadership development on the side, and then having my kind of quote unquote day job up until 2020. And then that was the invitation for me, and felt like the right time to really separate from my corporate career and start the business that I have today. So
Yeah, I think it's so important to hear that more often, because we're
yeah.
told like, oh, if you don't go all in and quit your job, that you're failing at it. And it's like, well, actually, better for your nervous system and your family at the same time.
Yeah.
So it's really great that you're like, yeah, I spent all of this time doing this work, embodying this work, because you're also
Mhm.
kind of testing it out as you're
Totally.
saying. And I can only imagine the impact you left with the organization that you were with, and all of that, and even the organizations that you're working with now. And I think just hearing you talk about the process of writing a book and putting it all together, and how it just started as your own reflection. And again, I can only imagine how much that time off actually gave you space to then recognize for other people how
Yes.
important that space is. Something we should all practice, I think, even a little more. What do you think, as far as resistance? We've kind of spoken about this, but what is one common rejection or objection that you
Mm.
hear from leaders when they're trying to get started and move through it?
Um, okay, so I had one thing in mind as you were asking the question, and then I'm like, oh, maybe it's something different. But I'll go with what I kind of had there first. I think the most common objection, first and foremost, for people is that it's a soft skill, that it's unnecessary. I think we kind of look at, there's the hard skills or the technical skills of doing our job, which we tend to place a little more value on than, let's say, some of these. And if you want to really get my blood boiling, it's referring to the people skills as soft skills, because I believe, in my experience has been, that they are the hardest skills to learn. I'll tell you what, it was much easier to get my engineering degree than it has been to learn how to navigate tough conversations in multiple different situations with groups and organizations and people, because there is no formula. There is no predictable, this and that, and nobody's written the rule book. There's a whole bunch of models and there's a whole bunch of things, but it is really about being so in the moment when you're in those conversations, And you just have to keep checking in with, how am I doing, right? You talked a lot about nervous system, like, am I triggered? Am I regulated? Because if I'm not, then this conversation is already dead in the water. And so it's not a soft skill. It's an incredibly difficult skill to learn. And I think it's one of those, I always equate it to building physical muscle, right? You don't go to the gym once and are fit. It's something we have to work at every day. And I just got back from 2 weeks of vacation, and I went to my first, workout class again, and my body is sore this week, and I only took 2 weeks off. And I think that's the same with these skills when we're talking about, tough conversations or communication or being present or listening without judgment and active listening. They are skills you have to work at every single day. And if you take a few months off, it's going to be difficult to get back in. And it's just constantly checking in with yourself and using the little tiny muscles every day.
Wow. And you're even talking about like recalibration, like reintegration, recalibration. And, hopefully you're keeping the same leaders with you for a certain period of time. That's our goal.
Yeah.
That's the goal. And as the new wave of leaders come in, there's new personality types, there's new diversity coming in the door. And so I'm hearing it's an evolution process that's never finished. It's a lot of, again, like you said, being present in the moment. And I feel like there has to be layers that you work with these leaders, because again, anybody who's never been in meditation or silence or stillness without thinking about what's coming next, I can only imagine that coming in to learn how to be present is a challenge. So it would be, So how does it look?
Everybody has a different entry point, right? I'll have some leaders that are well into their, self-reflection and self-awareness journey, and others that are just like, I'm just getting started. And it's like, okay, so it's a totally different, entry point. And like you said, we all have a certain level of capacity and a certain level of awareness. And we build slowly from wherever that leader is at.
Yeah, well, and it's great to even just put it out there that you don't have to be at a certain level of leadership to do something like this. And maybe we can start reframing the soft skills, because it's not. It's like, and it's the most important. I can see it in your face.
It is.
It's the most important skill that we develop, and we don't focus on it, or we are starting to see people focus on it now. And I feel partially it is the change in way in which we work. And again, we're shifting out of that understanding that midnight and then 4 a.m. wake ups to get all the work done. And endless burnout is not going to be the new normal going forward. And so it's a progression of setting those boundaries and having those conversations, and kind of seeing where people are outside of even the 9 to 5 or whatever it looks like. I think what you've said today has just been so empowering, and hearing, if you're struggling with empathy, like, just recognize it's the hardest thing to build.
It is.
Because the whole part when you said my engineering degree, that just blew my mind. You're like, this was harder than this. They're thinking, like, okay. But anyways, so I've appreciated this conversation so much, and your time, because I know you're busy. And what I would love to ask you a couple of questions. What are you working on right now? Is there anything that you want to put out there into the world that we can help support?
Thank you. Outside of just kind of regular speaking and training and leadership development engagement. So if anyone's interested in that, you can find that out on the website, or just DM me wherever you're listening to this conversation. I do have a retreat coming up this fall, which is geared to rest and reset of our nervous systems, because I think this is one of the hardest. It's definitely been one of the hardest things for me to do. And so as I get into that, and it's just been popping up more and more in my client work. So we've got that in the pipeline. And I think book number 2 is slowly starting to take shape, which is talking a little bit about boundaries and empathy, which is, kind of the next step. Because I think that's definitely been one of the the most recurring conversations that I have.
Is like how to hold the boundary and
Yeah,
even know what the boundary is. I think it's like,
yeah,
because you can't go from it's, we have that all or nothing mentality.
totally.
So we have to kind of like chisel that away and figure out the
Yeah,
fine balance. Anyway,
yeah.
amazing. Well, thank you, Erin. And if anybody wants to get connected, I'll make sure that your information is located in all of the places that we're live. But also,
Okay.
what's the best way for them to connect with you?
I would say just reach out and send me an email. It's Erin@erinthorp.ca.
Amazing. I love
Yeah.
it. Well,
Thank
I
you.
thank you again for having this conversation. And hopefully, oh, what I always love to ask is if there's one major theme out of
Oh.
everything you said today, I'm kind of put you on the spot here, but what would you hope that listeners take away today?
I would hope that listeners are a little bit more willing to give this a shot, right? To just try, dip a toe in, just try, especially if you've got someone in the team or someone on, that you maybe work with or in your life that you have difficulty with, that is that extra challenging kind of personality like we tend to all have. How can you just for maybe 2 or 3 minutes try to see things from their perspective? You know, get curious.
So good. So
Okay.
good. I love it.
All
Well,
right.
thank you